3/4 of people think Ireland is taking in too many refugees. That's according to a Red C poll published in the Business Post. Now, as always, polls are to be taken with a grain of salt, but 75% is quite a large number and not one easily brushed aside. Now, I've been planning on talking about immigration for a while now. It invariably comes up when talking about the housing crisis, and I often get comments asking me to talk about it. But let's face it, this topic is a very emotive and tricky one to navigate, especially if you want to try to remain inoffensive, as I do. I am the type of person who always tries to put myself in others' shoes before forming an opinion. I don't like causing offence, and I certainly don't ever set out to cause offence. Having said that, there are certain topics in the world today where offence is practically guaranteed, often by simply asking questions, and immigration is one of those topics. So I have resigned myself to the fact that this video may well cause offence. Now, before I dive into the topic at hand, I'd like to add a few more thoughts to what I've just spoken about. It is very easy to cause offence these days. Some may say I was oversensitive to Leo Varadkar's remarks about slow learners. I mean, I would disagree, as I feel it's an obvious one and certainly not something a leader of a country should say out loud, even if he thinks it. We can't police thoughts after all. But it is very easy to be offended nowadays. And if you are not offended, you should be. You should pick a side in the left or right game show the same way you would pick a sports team to follow and follow it unflinchingly, or else get called out for it, or worse, get called a snowflake or a fascist of some kind. Questions are not encouraged, and you must pick a side. There is no middle ground. Absolutism is what I am talking about here, and the world we live in now has it in spades. And to be honest, it is something that deeply troubles me. I would not class myself as left or right, although I would say I definitely lean left. But I don't like those descriptors, as I am not absolute in my views. I take each issue on its own merits, and I'd wager a lot of people do the same. In fact, the results of this poll make me think that there must be much more like me. We don't have to be absolute on everything. We can like a person, for example, without agreeing with absolutely everything they say. We can lean one way politically while still asking questions and diverging from that political slant. Questioning things is a good thing. Remember in school when teachers would always tell us that there's no such thing as a silly question? Well, we've grown up and completely forgotten that. Every policy, every agenda, every ideology should be questioned. Your own views should be questioned, and by yourself too. You should question your own views. Only by asking questions can we find the answers and be educated. If it's a good policy, agenda or ideology, it will stand up to robust questioning, and indeed will seek out that questioning to prove its worth. If a policy, however, cannot stand up to questioning and shuts down questioning, then it's not really a sound policy, is it? Sometimes outside voices can ask questions policymakers may simply have missed or overlooked, and that's a good thing. Will there be bad faith actors? Of course, but the answers can shut them down. Questions help refine policy, agendas and ideologies. That is, if they want to be refined. So, does the Irish government want the Irish people questioning Irish immigration policy? Well, yes and no. Yes, because it causes division and tensions, which means fingers get pointed every which way but towards the government. And no, because they are clearly quite happy to keep the policy going as is, and that raises questions in and of itself. But the results of this poll have opened Pandora's box, it seems. If my, albeit and admittedly small Twitter feed is anything to go by, more and more people are openly questioning our immigration policy. It has emboldened people to speak up and ask questions. For quite some time now, immigration was a taboo topic. And to be honest, it still feels like it is, and yet 75% of respondents to this Red C poll felt compelled to say we are taking in too many migrants. That number cannot be hand-waved away as all belonging to the far right. They are not all racist. They are ordinary people with genuine concerns. Concerns that, if the government had even the faintest grip on the realities of life in Ireland for ordinary people, would be addressed. But they aren't addressed. Instead, they're called racist and far right, and it's just left at that. So what are some of the questions I'd like to see answered about our immigration policy? Well, let's start by asking, what are the criteria used in the decision-making process of where refugees and asylum seekers are housed? Because it would appear to me that there are none. Large groups of asylum seekers and refugees are being housed in inadequate accommodation and in areas where there are already strains on the services available to the local community. In short, they are being housed in working class or rural areas where amenities and services are already stretched to breaking point, or in hotels in tourist hotspots, which reduces the tourism capacity of those areas, thus hurting local businesses and employees who depend on that tourism to survive. Now, I would argue that this is by design, as it makes it easier to characterise concerns raised as racist, which invariably breeds frustration, fear, and more division. And as I said, if everyone is pointing fingers at each other, then no one is pointing them at the government. Divide and conquer yet again. More people arriving on our shores mean more competition for already scarce resources like housing, healthcare, childcare, and school places. There's nothing racist about saying such a thing, and while we are a ridiculously rich country, for the vast majority of people, it certainly doesn't feel like it, and we have very little to show for our supposed wealth. Instead, we have inexcusable waiting lists for any and all medical services. We have a housing crisis that is causing more devastation every single day. 20 deaths of homeless people already this year, by the way, including one child. We have too few childcare and preschool places and too many students per teachers in our schools. In short, our country, for the vast majority of people, is a disaster area with people fighting for scraps. Is it wrong, then, to question why the government are so gung-ho about welcoming everyone and anyone into our country? We can barely manage what we already have. There is no faith in this government to adequately respond to these fears or to adequately and competently house those coming into the country when they can't even house and look after the people already here. And to be clear, I'm talking about logistics. If you have a small town or village and build a few hundred new private houses, as has happened in communities all over the country, is the infrastructure in place right away for those people new to the area? Are there more schools built alongside the new housing estate? Are there new GP surgeries opened to prepare for and correspond with the population growth? Are roads ready for more traffic? Are the essential utilities capable of sustaining the new demand, like water, electricity, and internet connections? Of course not, because this is Ireland, and we don't do planning. These things may catch up eventually, but they are not ready to go when the new people arrive. People have already seen this firsthand, and yet when they call out this lack of foresight and planning now, it's branded racist and far right, which is an unfair characterization of genuine concerns. 76% of respondents can appreciate some of the anger people feel about asylum seekers being moved into their local area. Again, a large percentage that cannot be simply written off as far-right agitators. These are real people with real concerns and real worries that are just being told to keep quiet and not to ask questions. That is not right. Another genuine question I have is how long this is sustainable. We have the right to put caps on immigration into our country, so when do we reach a breaking point? I would have thought we are already there, considering we are now offering to pay the EU €150 million because we can't take in an extra 350 asylum seekers as we have nowhere to put them. And there are now asylum seekers sleeping in tents, and plans to allow even more to sleep in tents. How is that something to be proud of? How is that compassionate? How is that a good thing? It's not. And if we cannot provide proper shelter for those entering our country, then surely it is inhumane to continue allowing people in. And no, housing them on flotels or in ex-nursing homes is not the answer, nor is designated camping sites on unused government land, nor is housing them in modular homes built on land put aside for much-needed social housing. More genuine questions must be asked about the two-tiered and inherently racist system we have that places certain asylum seekers and refugees above others, with some being given greater support simply because of where they are from. That's not right or fair, and quite frankly, it's a real example of racism, perpetrated by our government and not the ordinary people of this country. Another question is how we deal with those who arrive at our airports having lost or destroyed their documentation in transit. Plenty of other democratic, progressive countries would not tolerate that sort of thing, and yet in Ireland, many of them are given permission to stay. Why? An Taoiseach did not provide a good enough answer, in my opinion, when asked that question by Grit Media's Ben Scallon, saying they were given permission to stay on humanitarian grounds and that many of them would not be allowed back into their own country, which just begs more questions really, doesn't it? Questions must also be asked about how long this immigration policy can be funded and indeed where those funds are going. Who exactly are being awarded the contracts for housing refugees and asylum seekers in the various buildings and hotels across the country, and just how much is being paid? Quite apart from the immigration issue, this particular point speaks to the far wider issue in Ireland that is the absolute lack of transparency about any tendering process. So who is gaining financially from these contracts? Why is it such a seemingly lucrative venture that nursing homes are shutting down in order to be offered as accommodation for migrants? Who are the vested interests that are benefiting? Because this is Ireland, and whenever you can't understand a decision, it's best to follow the money trail for answers. Now, they were just a handful of questions that I, and I'm sure others have, that are more practical, pragmatic, logistical questions, looking at the issue without seeing race and simply seeing numbers. But of course there are other questions. Questions based around perceptions that could easily be shut down with answers. But again, there are no answers, only shouts and cries of racism. There are concerns about how it appears anecdotally that migrants are looked after and treated better than the Irish people, that they, for example, are housed ahead of Irish people, some of whom may have been on the waiting list for social housing for years with no end in sight. Now, there absolutely could be genuine reasons for this, but again, there is no transparency in Ireland, and a lack of transparency leads to cynicism, fear, and division. These concerns are exacerbated when the government seem to be far more hands-on in tackling the migrant issue than they are about the now record 12,259 homeless people in Ireland accessing emergency accommodation. A record number, I might add, that does not include the estimated 290,000 hidden homeless, a number that can only be rising after the lifting of the eviction ban. When there are calls for a NEFIT-style response to the migrant accommodation issue and modular houses being built, and quickly, I might add, and yet none for the homeless crisis, surely it's easy to understand these concerns and where these perceptions come from. There are also concerns about where the asylum seekers are coming from. There are certainly a few countries on the list that would raise a few eyebrows. The United States, for example, but there are others. There are concerns that we are seen as a soft touch for so-called economic migrants. And when you have Roderic O'Gorman telling people that if they come to Ireland, they'll have their own front door in a few months, well, it's not hard to see why. Which again leads back to the perception that asylum seekers and refugees are looked after better than our own. Perceptions can cause a lot of damage if left unchecked, and it seems that our government are happy to let the tensions simmer based on these perceptions, while occasionally fanning the flames themselves. The story of the nursing homes comes to mind, or indeed the idea floated about building modular homes on land put aside for social housing. There is also the general concern that the mass immigration into Ireland is detrimental to lower paid and manual workers. Wages, which have been stagnant for quite some time now, could be in danger of being pushed down in a race to the bottom with the cheaper labour that mass immigration brings. And that's not even to mention the exploitation of the migrant workers in that case. Everyone deserves a living wage. So plenty of real issues and just some of the concerns that should not simply be dismissed as racist or far right. And that's to avoid completely the topic regarding the ease at which the many different cultures we have taken in take to and integrate with our own Irish culture and values, which would be bound to be shouted down and yet is still an important topic. It may be uncomfortable to talk about it, but we are supposed to be adults, right? Mature conversations should be possible, and they would be if we didn't live in a world of such absolutes. But I'll leave that for another day. Suffice it to say, I think Ireland's immigration policy is causing some consternation among the Irish population. Are they all unfounded and hyperbolic? Are 75% of people making a mountain out of a molehill? Or are there genuine concerns that need to be addressed and considered? I would say it's the latter. Even if some issues are blown out of proportion, we should not be afraid to talk about it. This is not 1984 after all. Well, not yet anyway. Only through robust discussion can we see all sides and put fears to rest, either through education or changing of policy to align with the mandate of the people. Now, I'm sure this topic will come up again, and I certainly hope I haven't offended too many people. If you've enjoyed what I've had to say, then please consider subscribing to the channel for more from me. And if you really liked it, you can now also buy me a coffee, which will be greatly appreciated. Don't forget to like and share, and let me know what you think in the comments below. You can also follow me on Twitter for real-time reactions to the news of the day. Links are in the description below. Thanks for joining me today. Until next time, slán go fóill.